Now to Ukraine, and Russia has carried out another wave of aerial attacks across the country overnight. Ukrainian officials say the attack targeted critical energy infrastructure with dozens of missiles and nearly 200 drones launched by Moscow. At least 8 people were injured in the city of Kharkiv. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy repeated his call for a truce on air and sea attacks. Our correspondent Max Zander joins us now from Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Max, President Zelenskyy has again called for an aerial and sea truce, with the U.S. halting military aid and intelligence sharing for Ukraine. How much pressure is the country under now?
Yeah, Terry, quite a lot, I would say. Ukraine is in a very difficult situation right now. We don't know all the details of what is happening right now, but it's probably safe to assume that no American military equipment, no spare parts, no American ammunition is crossing the border into Ukraine. Now, the Ukrainian armed forces might not notice the change right away, because for certain types of weapons they have sufficient stockpiles, but in a few weeks, a few months' time, if they don't find any replacements elsewhere or the U.S. starts delivering again, they're going to be in a very difficult situation there. And with the American military equipment, it's important to point out that it's not just about the quantities, but a lot of the high-tech stuff, a lot of the very effective stuff comes from the United States. If you're thinking of F-16 fighter jets, for example, if you're thinking of fighter jet ammunition in general, the multiple rocket launch systems, and the short and medium-term rockets, for example, but also air defense systems like the Patriot system, where there is no adequate European alternative, for example. So some of the stuff can be replaced, some of the stuff can be replaced. It's going to make it very logistically very hard, and for some of the military aid from the U.S. at the moment, there doesn't really seem to be an adequate alternative. Looking at intelligence sharing, this is an effect that can be probably felt a lot faster. Again, we don't really know exactly what the Americans have been sharing versus what they're not sharing any longer, but it's safe to assume that the Ukrainians were receiving satellite imagery to do reconnaissance behind enemy lines, as well as they were providing intelligence on signals, so in order to detect incoming aerial attacks, for example, large-scale attacks, as we've seen last night. So that puts Ukraine in a very difficult position there.
Now, fresh talks between the U.S. and Ukraine are set to take place next week. The last meeting between the country's leaders ended in disaster. What is Ukraine expecting? What is it hoping for this time, Max?
Right, a lot has happened since that Oval Office meeting that went way out of hand last Friday. The Ukrainian and the American teams have been talking to each other, from what we understood, trying to find a way forward. President Trump has exerted a lot of pressure on President Zelenskyy, on the entire country, to kind of throw the Ukrainian leadership into submission. During his speech to Congress, President Trump said that President Zelenskyy reached out to him. He claimed that he apologized to him. He seemed quite happy about the change of tone there. So we'll have to see if this is a good sign for both parties, for the Ukrainians looking forward. From what we've been told is that President Zelenskyy will travel to Saudi Arabia next week, and he will meet U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who already talked to the Russians in Moscow recently. So they will likely talk about further steps forward in finding some kind of ceasefire deal. Perhaps also the mineral deal is still on the table. So it's not exactly clear if this is going to be a positive development for Ukraine, but certainly it looks better than the last couple of days.
And finally, Max, Ukraine's energy infrastructure was attacked overnight by Russia. How are these latest attacks impacting the country?
Right, so there was a large-scale attack last night, as you said. It happened in 2 waves with roughly close to 70 cruise missiles, close to 200 drones and decoy drones all across the country. And from what we've been told, most from what has been reported, these attacks were targeting energy infrastructure, in particular gas infrastructure all across the country. For example, parts of a pipeline in Poltava were hit. There have been numerous, this has been the latest in a string of attacks, for example, in the Odessa region, where energy infrastructure was hit over the last 2.5 weeks about 6 times. So this has an impact on the country's ability to produce gas, to produce energy. This has an impact on the civilian population, on the industry, and of course puts people at great risk. Now, this isn't really new because this has been happening since the winter of the first year of the war, pretty much. Large-scale attacks of that sort, with more than 100 missiles or drones, have also been happening for quite some time now. But just imagine, just to think about the time we're talking about right now, where the Americans are withdrawing some of their military aid, some of the air defense. That puts things into perspective and puts Ukraine in a very dangerous position, as we've seen last night.
Max, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Max Zander, in Kyiv.